Long before a bullet took his life, Dr. King, Rabbi Heschel, and others saw that systemic policy violence threatened the soul of this nation through interlocking issues of injustice. In 1967-68, he paired this diagnosis and called it the Poor People's Campaign. He said America's spiritual sickness was terminal and insisted that unless we experienced a radical revolution of values, such a moral revival, he knew, could not simply be spoken into existence. It had to be lived into existence. The poor people, who were often blamed and pitted against one another, would have to unite in a national campaign of direct action to save the souls of America, and others would have to come alongside of them. 50 years later, Dr. King's life and witness can help us name America's spiritual sickness and see that the only hope is a brand new time of fusion politics. We face a national crisis not unlike in some ways the storm that rocked America in '68. But too often, our attempts to diagnose what ails us cannot get beyond the tired debates of left versus right and Democrat versus Republican. That is why we need a Poor People's Campaign, a national call to a moral revival more than ever. Because there are 5 interlocking injustices, 5 bacteria, if you will, 5 diseases that threaten democracy of the United States simultaneously: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, militarism, and the distorted moral view of Christian nationalism. Now, as a preacher, I would like to hope that this crisis would compel Americans to cry out to whatever source of divinity they know for help. But far too much of our religion and our public life has contributed to the moral crisis we now face. We suffer from a civil religion that has justified our social sin. And so America has a moral malady. And sometimes it tempts us to despair. But it also then can bring us in the darkest moments to the reality that we must have a moral movement, that there's only one way out. We've got to link up with others who are directly impacted by the interlocking injustices. We cannot just deal with these separately. Black people can't get over here and deal with racism, white people over here with poverty, and environmentalists over here. No, we have to find a way to connect together in a deeply moral way with a deeply progressive and prophetic agenda, and refuse to be divided by the few who seem to benefit from a system that hurts us all. America, I believe, is right in the middle in the possibility of a third Reconstruction. And at this moment like this must remind us of the one truth that is at the heart of the tradition of resistance that goes all the way back to the great psalmist. Find it in Psalm 118. The stones that the builders rejected can become the chief cornerstones. In other words, what we need now is the work of the rejected stones to lead a revival. Those who've been rejected through racism, rejected through classism, rejected through homophobia, rejected because of poverty, rejected because of militarism, rejected. That fusion coalition must come together, and we must assert our moral authority as children of God, believing that we can shift the nation's narrative. We must know this, that when a budget director goes on TV and puts an ash cross on his forehead on Ash Wednesday, and then proposes to cut Medicare and cut 7 million people from heating assistance and cut people's food stamps, we don't have merely a Democrat or Republican problem. We have a moral problem, and we need a Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. When leaders of both parties will celebrate a budget compromise, and one side will say we did it for the military, and the other side says we did it for the middle class, and nobody says what was done for the poor, the 140-some million people. We need a moral revival and a Poor People's Campaign. when we are 53 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and we have the attacks on voting rights like we haven't seen since Jim Crow, when people are more interested in protecting the NRA than funding our schools, when we refuse to stop the selling of assault rifles, but we cut health care and want to ban DACA students, when we destroy the environment, when we want to fund the war machine and fund a racist border wall, but we defend defunding poverty programs and refuse to pay people a living wages and protect unions' right, when you have preachers claiming to be representing God, they're so loud when it comes to being against gay people and abortion and prayer for the schools, and loud on supporting tax cuts for the welfare for the rich and the greedy at the tunes of trillions of dollars, the amount of dollars we haven't seen transferred on the backs of poor people like since the time of slavery. And when they claim Trump is the will of God and they say nothing about racism and poverty and stopping the sale of assault guns, we must have a movement that challenges this heresy and names this hypocrisy and refuses to stand down. And this must be a movement rooted in love. It can't be just a movement about hate and what we're against, or hating individuals. It must be a movement rooted in love and truth. It must be a movement where we hate the policies, but we almost have a deep pity for the powerful that will use their power to hurt people. Because I tell you, the other day I was thinking as I was reading through some Howard Thurman, something is wrong in the hearts of people when they gain power and then they use that power to inflict pain on the poor and the vulnerable. How much do you have to dehumanize yourself in order to dehumanize other people? That is the question before America.